We are going to build an API using Next.js with MongoDB. In case you are new to Next.js, Next.js is a popular framework built on top of Node.js, allowing React web applications to perform more effectively through server-side rendering and static site generating. In short, Nextjs allows us to build full-stack application using one environment, which means that we are going to use a single code base for the application. And to appreciate Nextjs, unless you are familiar with main stack, and that is React, Node.js, Express, and MongoDB. In case you are new to main stack, then you can consider check my main full stack course with over 80 hours video content. Now let's get into the main logic for this video, and that is building an API using Nextjs. At this point, I assume that you are familiar with Node.js, Express, React, and MongoDB. Before we get into that, let's install the framework. So if you go to the official website, click on the snippet, and that is npx create next-app at latest. So let's get back to Visual Studio Code. And before that, let me show you the extensions that I'm using in case you may have interest with. I'm using a theme called Tenacious, which is this one. And then the icon I'm using is called Helium icon, which is this one. And we're going to install MongoDB for VS Code. And this extension will help us to visualize our MongoDB right inside our Visual Studio Code. And instead of using Postman, I'm going to use what is called Tender Client extension to be able to test our API. With this one being said, let's get into the main logic. I'm going to open the terminal. We are going to provide answers to these questions. The first one is the project name. I'm going to name this one as Next API using MongoDB and hit enter. And the next one is, are we going to use TypeScript? For me, I'm going to hit no. And then for ESLint, no. And then for detailing CSS, I will say yes, even though we are not going to focus on the front end. So this is optional. And next step is that, are we going to use SRC directory? I will say no for this. And then we're going to use app router, which is a new feature in Nextjs, which is recommended. So I will say yes for this. And then for the alias, I will say no. And then it's going to install all the packages for us. After installing, let's look at the folder structure, which is this one. With this installation, we have front end and back end being combined together, which means that we can write backend code, likewise React code. In case you are new to this, let me walk you through the folder structure. So first of all, we have what is called the app folder. When using Nextjs, one thing that you need to bear in mind is the naming convention. They have some reserved folder names and files. One is the app folder. This is really important. So in here, we're going to write our backend logic plus our front-end logic. And then Nextjs has two components. One is server-side component and client-side component. If you want to write React logics, you're going to use client-side component, but for backend, we're going to use server-side component. And each of these ones has their own file names and folders. And since we are going to focus on the API development, we're going to focus on the server-side component. So in the app here, we're going to write our backend logics. And we have the CSS file and then the layout.js. When using traditional React, we can regard the layout.js as the index.js, where we have our entry point for our React application. But when using Nextjs, it is called layout. And then we have the page.js. When using React, we can call this one as homepage. As you can see here, we have page.js, but the name of the component is called home. This means that the name of the file is really important. If you want to create React component, the file name must be page. But for APIs, we're going to place it in a folder called APIs. Don't worry, we will get there very soon. And that is all what we need for this. These ones are just configurations files. Let's run our application to see how it's going to work. I'm going to navigate into Next API and use npm run dev. And it is running on this port. I'm gonna copy this one and back to the browser, paste that. And this is what we have. We are going to remove the default styling. So let's get into let me close the terminal. Let's get into the layout. This is the entry point, and this is where we have the global.css. Remove that, and let's see, and this is what we have. Let's also remove everything from here, so we can regard this one as the home page when using React. Now, inside here, I'm going to remove everything, and I'm going to provide a div, and then provide some description as that. With this one, save it, and let's see, and this is what we have. So let's get into the main logic, how we are going to build an API. We are going to focus on the app router here, and that is the app folder. To be able to create a route, we're going to provide a folder under the app called API. This is the required name. If you change it, it will never work. And we are going to build a simple to-do API where we're going to perform all the CRUD operations. When it comes to routing in Nextjs, it is different when using React. Nextjs uses what is called file-based routing. When using React, unless you install third-party package like React Router DOM, so in here, how are we going to have routing? As I said that, we're going to have two types of components, server and then the client. And by default, all components are server component, unless we say that we want that component to be a client-side component. Now I'm going to show you how to create a simple API. So here under the app folder, create one folder called API, and inside we can have different collections. And since we are going to build a simple to-do API, we're going to name the folder as to-dos. So here the endpoint goes like this. You're going to have the base URL, which is this. It is going to append the API folder /to-dos. So in here, we're going to have our route, and it goes like route.js. This name is required. This one will tell Nextjs that this is an API route. In here, we're going to have the following route. One for creating to do. We are going to perform these CRUD operations. And this is how we create route when using Nextjs. For the meantime, we are going to ignore database operations, and this is the format. We are going to export the function as async, and I'm going to use normal function. And then here, if you are making post request, we're going to use post method. And then as a function call, pass in the request as that, and here goes our logic. This is how we create post request when using Nextjs. You don't have to name the route. Nextjs knows that indeed this is a post request. And one thing that you have to understand that you can have one post request per file. So you cannot have one more post request here. In this way, you're going to have an error. With this one, save it, and if I refresh the page, nothing is happening. But if I try to visit the endpoint, remember the endpoint now becomes the base URL is going to append the API /to-dos, and from there it's going to run this code. So it's going to be as /API and then todos and hit enter. And we got beautiful error that says that the name post is defined multiple times. So take note about this. So now here comes the question. How can we make a request to fetch and then get a single to do? Because these ones requires get method. Don't worry, I'll give you the trick how to go by. So for this one, I'm going to remove this one from here. And if I save it, refresh, and as you can see, the server is not working. This means that we are not returning anything back to the user when the user visits the API endpoint. Now, let me restart the server. And then how can we return something to the user? And Next.js make it easy to use what is called next response from the server. I'm going to import it from the next/server. So in here, we are going to return. And then as new, next response. And then in here, we can send our data back to the user. For the meantime, I'm going to send some static data by using json.stringify and then pass in the object. And here I will say message. Save it and let's see if I refresh the page. Well, we are using post method. So let me change this one to get method and let's see, refresh, and we have it as welcome to my first API. This means that our API is working. So we're going to use the Tender client for testing our APIs. So after installing that one, I'm going to have it as that. Click on that and then click on new request. I'm going to provide the HTTP and then /API and todos and hit send. And we have the response. We're going to have one for the creation. Let me change this one back to post. And then copy this one for fetching, paste it here, change this one to get. And I will say, and let's see, this one is for fetching. Let me have one. Let me rename this one to get all. And then let me duplicate. This one is for creating. And then the method here is post and send. We have welcome to my first API. Let me change this one to create endpoint or create API. Let's see. We have it as that. And this one also, we have it as that. Now here comes the question. How can we fetch a single to do? Because we cannot have multiple methods on one file. This is where dynamic paths comes in when using Next.js. Let me show you what I mean here. Back to the folder structure. To be able to have dynamic route in the app folder and then inside the API folder, we're going to have a different folder. In this case, it's going to be a special folder by bringing in the square bracket and then provide any identifier. And here I'm going to use ID, or I can say post ID, and I'm going to access this one in our route. To make it easy, I'm going to use ID and then square bracket. And to be able to create the file, we're going to add it in the folder by having route.js. Well, this folder is supposed to be inside the to-dos folder. Sorry guys. Yeah, this one instead. So now we are in the to-dos and we have the catch-all route or the dynamic route, and that is the ID. So in here, we can access the ID in the route. I'm going to copy the logic for fetching for this one and then bring it on the dynamic route here. We will need the next response. And then here we go. Supposed to be import. I'm going to change this one to single, and then fetch single post. Now let's try out in the tender client. Let me duplicate. I will say single, and this is a path. We are going to navigate into the API /todos/ any ID. So it goes like this. If I say 1 or 2, now we got it as single to do. Now let me have 1 for updating and deleting, because we will need the ID to perform those operations. Copy and paste, change this one to delete, and change the method to delete, and then here as delete post. And then let's have 1 for update as update post. Now let's try these ones out. Copy and paste. This one is delete, and then the method is delete. Have 1 for update, rename update, and the method is put method. So let me try out to make sure that they are all working. Forgetting all, it worked. Single, I think the single one is not working. It is returning an HTML. So let's see. Get single one. Oh, sorry, I have the same method. So change this one to put. And I believe that it will work. And indeed, it worked. And then delete. It worked. Update, fine. And then create, it is also fine. Now we have our APIs being rendering or working perfectly. What has left is integrating MongoDB into our application. Now let me close all the instances of this. So how can we install or use MongoDB in our application? Remember that any folder that you place in the app folder becomes a route. So here we can avoid that, and let's say if I want to have utils folder, if I make use of utils like this one becomes a path on the client side because it is not inside the API folder. Let's say I want to create about us component. So here I will say about here. And to create the component, you're going to have a file called page.js. So this one can be a server component or client component. So I'm going to scaffold by using RFCE and have my dummy component. I'm going to change this one to about. So here as about us. Now this component is going to run on the server because we are using the app router feature. So let me prove to you. In here, we can write any backend logic code the same way we did when using the route handlers, which are these ones. So to prove to you, I'm going to import Node.js module called fs. So fs is a module from Node.js. So if I log the fs module, so for this, how can we run this component? And this is the path. It is going to be as the base URL /about. Now, if I go to the page and use /about, now we have the about component. But if you check our backend or the terminal, we're going to see the Node.js logic being rendered or displayed. This means that we can write Node.js logic inside this component. But let's say I want to use React features like useState or useEffect. Let's see the error. I'm gonna destructure and take the useEffect. Then in here, I will say useEffect and then comma the array. With this one, save it and let's see the error. As you can see, it says that you are importing a component that needs useEffect. It only works in the client component, but none of the parents are marked with use client. So it means that by default, all components are server components. But in case we want to convert this one to client component, we have to tell Nextjs that, hey, Next, we want to use this one as client. Therefore, we're going to provide this directive as use client. Now, if I save it, let's see if I refresh it, I have this warning from the backend logic. This means that this is front-end application or component. Why am I using backend logic from Node.js? If I remove this and this one, now let's see the result, and this is what we have. So now let's focus on the API development. What has left is to connect to MongoDB and then create our model and interact with our database using our route. So now, if you want to create a folder or any utils folder in the app, take note that it is going to be regarded as a route or path. But we can avoid that by using this syntax. Let's say I want to create utils folder. I'm going to use this one, and then I will say utils, and as that. For this one, Nextjs is not going to regard this one as a route. But to make it more user-friendly, I'm going to create a folder called SRC. So in here, I will say SRC, and then in here, I'm going to have my custom folders. The first one is, I'm going to have one for utils. And I can have one for models. So in the utils, we are going to connect to MongoDB as DB connect. All right, we are going to use Mongoose. So let me shut down, clear it, and install npm I Mongoose. Have you seen how Nextjs is making our life easier when building full stack applications? All right, it is done. So let me clear it, and then I'm going to write the logic here. So first step is, let's import the Mongoose package, and the function goes like this. Connect db is equal to async, and then I'm using arrow function here as that. Let's bring in try and catch, and then in the try, I'm going to say const con is equal to await mongoose.connect. So in here, you're going to provide our MongoDB connection string. If you don't have it, go to mongodb.com and then log in and create your MongoDB connection string. But in case you are not familiar with that, I'll provide a link to show you how to get your MongoDB connection string. But lucky for me, I have already installed MongoDB locally. Therefore, I can use the MongoDB connection string. So if I go to the MongoDB extension here, this is my connection string. I'm going to copy that. And in case you are new to MongoDB extension, to be able to connect, first step is that make sure to have your MongoDB connection string. Click on the plus sign, and then here, click on connect, and then paste your MongoDB connection string over here, and then connect, and you'll be good to go. At this point, I assume that you have your MongoDB connection string. I'm going to paste mine over here as that. And then I'm going to rename this one to Next.API. All right. So in case everything goes on well, I will say DB connected. And then in the catch block here, I'm going to log. All right. So we have to export as default, which is equal to db connect or connect db. So where are we going to use or call this one? When using separate server, for example, when using Express, we are going to call this one in the server file. But with Nextjs, we are going to call it anytime you want to perform any operations. So let's get into the models folder. So in here, I'm going to have one file or one model called todo.js. And I'm going to provide you with the model, which is this. At this point, I assume that you're familiar with Mongoose. And this is our schema by having the title and then the completed. Let me pass in the timestamp. This means we're gonna get the date automatically as soon as the document has been created. And here is our model. And this is our model to create instances of to-do. So now we have our connection string and then our model. How are we going to create? And here comes the logic. Let's get into the route, and that is the API and then route. Let's begin with the creation. So for this, we will need two things. One is the connection method as connectDB, which is this one, and also the to-do model, which is this. Perfect, right? So let me bring this one up here like that. And in here, we are going to connect to DB by using the connectDB as that. Now with this one, anytime we hit this endpoint, first it's going to connect to MongoDB before it's going to perform the operation. This is one caveat when using Nextjs, but let's see what will happen. Let's get into the tender client, which is this, and then for the creation, if I hit send, before hitting the send, let's see the terminal. It is not working. Let's run the server. As you can see, DB has not been connected, but as soon as I hit this endpoint, let's see DB connected, and we have the route that we hit. As you can see with Nextjs, we have very good development experience. In case we are using separate server, unless we implement all these logins by ourselves. Now we are all set to create our to-dos. So in here, I will say create the to-do. So here comes the question. How can we access the payload from the user? This is where the request here comes in handy. So if we log the request, we have a method called JSON. In case we are using separate server, we're going to use a middleware from Express as express.json. But for Nextjs, it is called request.json. That is why I made mention that to appreciate Nextjs, unless you are familiar with Express or Node.js. Now with this one, let's pass in some payload when creating the post. Under the body, we're going to provide it as JSON data. I will say title and Node.js guide, and then the description Node.js, for example, and then send. Let's check our terminal. And we've got something strange. The issue here is that we have to await it by bringing await in front of it. All right, so let's try again. And this time around, we have the payload. So we can create the to-do using this. So let's get into the creation of the post. And it goes like this. I will say to-do is equal to await the to-do model dot create. And let me pass in the, well, let me assign to what is called to-do data is equal to that, and remove one of this. And here we're gonna pass this one to the creation here. Next step is that we have to send this one to the user than this static text. So remove the curly braces from here, and then just pass in the, and that is it with this one. Save it, and let me try send, and we have the to-do being created with the ID of this, the date created. So if I check my DB, this one, and that is Next API, we have the to-do being created as that. How awesome it is. Next step is fetching all to-dos. Let me add one more to-do. I will say React.js guide, not this one, but instead this one. And send, we have two to-dos. I'm going to fetch all to-dos. So let's get into the route. And then here, we're gonna connect to DB as we did here. Copy that, paste it here, and then let's bring in the model as const todos is equal to await todo model dot find, and that is it. And remove this and then pass in the todos. Alright, so let's see the magic. Tender client here getting all fetch, and we have the todos as that. Now how can we update or delete? Remove this. This is where dynamic routing comes in. Close all the instances. So let's get into the dynamic folder, which is this. So here, how can we access the ID? Now to get the ID, we're gonna get it from what is called params. So in here, we are going to destructure, comma here, and use what is called params. Now if I log the params, let's see. Let's get into the tender client. And then single send. Let's check the terminal. And we have it with ID of 2 because this is what we passed. And we got the ID from the folder name that we wrote here as that. Alright, so now we can get the ID from that. So we're gonna perform the operation, and that is it, guys. So let's get here and let's connect to MongoDB, and let's copy this import, bring it to the dynamic route here, and here let's connect, and it goes like connect DB, and here as const todo is equal to await todo dot find by ID, and the ID can be found on the params. So let's destructure, or I would say get the ID as const is equal to params. Let's destructure the ID as that and pass in the ID as that, and then send the todo as an object. Perfect. Moment of truth. Let's get to the single. Let me provide the right ID. Let me get to the creation. I think we have the ID here. Yeah, the ID for this is that, and then for the single, provide as that, and then send, and we have it as that. Next one is going to be delete. It's going to be the same process. Copy this one, and then in here paste it, or even the entire logic for this, and then in the delete paste that. The difference here is going to be find by ID and delete, and here I will say post deleted. And then for the update, so here let me ignore the response, and for the update it follows the same thing. So let me destructure the params here. Likewise the update as params, and here as find by ID and update, and here remove this as find by ID and update, and the ID can be found on the update, and what I want to update we can get it from the request object. So here as, let me bring it down here as get user data is equal to const data is equal to await the request.json, and then pass in what we want to update. Then the third argument provide new to true. Alright, so let me send the data as this. Perfect. So we are done with our CRUD operations. Let's try out. In the tender client, let me update before deleting. I'm going to provide the ID for this called React.js guide. And for the update, I'm going to provide body here. The title, I will say HTML guide, and then provide the ID. I want to change from React to HTML, and we got the update as that. Now it's time for us to implement the deleting. So copy this ID, the delete here, provide the delete, the ID instead, and then send, and post deleted. And supposed to be to do deleted but not post. So let me change the deleting, which is this one, to do. So if I fetch all to do's, I'm gonna have one because the HTML has been deleted. And indeed we have one. Catch you up in my next video.